To begin hospice history, one needs to go right back to the Middle Ages. The word hospice actually means resting place on the pilgrimage. And it was where pilgrims travelling to the great cathedrals or monasteries would pause and have a time of rest and recuperation, and their blisters would be healed and cured and that sort of thing, and gradually more and more medical things were done in the hospices. And of course, Bury St Edmunds was one of the great medieval pilgrimage centres. Glastonbury, Canterbury and Bury St Edmunds, I think, were the three major shrines that people came to pray at, often of course praying for healing, and with various needs, like physical needs like that. And so round Bury grew up a whole series of hospices. There were in fact 7 of them on every way into Bury. I think there was a hospice where people could stay, and as I say, as time went on, they could have more and more care and healing if they needed it. There is a book about the medieval hospices and hospitals of Bury St Edmunds, and that is the site of St Nicholas Hospice. And we deliberately chose the name of St Nicholas for here to link ourselves with that historical route, because I think it's very important that we're part of a long, long tradition of caring, really, and Christian caring at that. That went on until the Reformation, and then about 1540, when the abbeys were all closed down and pilgrimages were stopped, then the hospices disappeared. Just a few, nationally, survived and turned into hospitals. The great London teaching hospitals like St Bartholomew's and St Thomas's and St Mary's, they all come from medieval hospices. If they've got a saint's dedication, I think that's a pretty fair guess that they came from medieval hospice. In Bury, of course, they all became ruins, and some of them still survive. You can see the remains of St Sepulchre's if you go along Fordham Road. On your right, a little square box remains there. This is at the corner of Barton Road, and actually the wall is the outside wall of the medieval St Nicholas Hospice. The window actually comes from St Petronella's Hospice, which was in Southgate Street, and which was moved there in the 19th century. Somebody wanted to save it, so they put it in what was really not the outside wall of the hospice area, not the actual building itself, you see. So it wouldn't have had a window in originally. But anyway, that's nice, and it's nice that it still exists, so we can say that's St Nicholas. After the Reformation, there was none of this sort of hospice care at all, until in the 19th century people began to get concerned about the condition under which the working people in the great cities were living and dying and getting diseases. And they set up what were given the charming name of homes for incurables, which sounds awful, doesn't it? But that's what they called them. And St Joseph's Hospice in Hackney was one of the pioneers. Irish nuns came over and set that up to help the poor in that part of London in the 1890s. And that's still going today and has developed in that sort of way. And there are many other examples like that. But the modern hospice movement, as we see it today, really dates from 1967, when Cecily Saunders was appointed medical director at St Christopher's Hospice. She became Dame Cecily Saunders. She completely revolutionised the approach to care and dying. It was not any longer just somewhere you went to die, but it was somewhere where you went for palliative care. And one of her great phrases that I often quote and love is that it's living life to the full, however short that life is going to be. So that's what it's all about. And it's full life, not anything else. So after her pioneer work there, then the hospice movement spread and grew quite rapidly. And there are now probably about 200 hospices up and down the country, serving apparently about 200,000 people a year, but still not enough. There's still a lot to do to make sure that everybody has a good death and there's not a lot of pain and suffering in the process of dying. So that's the background like that. Now to come to my story, I was rector of parishes between here and Thetford, Hingham, Ampton, Livermere, and later Barnham as well. And in, I suppose, the late 1970s, I was there from 1974 till I retired in 1997. And I had three situations very close together which caused me a lot of concern. One was a very wealthy farmer who had a cancer, and you watched him go down, and they took him into hospital, and they boosted him up and sent him home, and he went down again gradually, went back into hospital, came up not quite as far as before, went in again, and it was this sort of seesaw motion that he was living in. And it was very sad to watch. It was very sad for his family. And one felt surely there ought to be something a bit better that we could do for this chappie. Incidentally, when he went into hospital, he always took a picture with him, not of his wife or family, but of his prized Chardonnay bull. And he always had flower arrangements, not made out of flowers, but made out of ears of wheat and barley. He was a devoted farmer. But he was a lovely man, and his family have been a great help and support to the hospice since his death. At the same time, there was somebody living in one of the council houses in one of my villages who again had been sent home, sent by the hospital, said, "We can't do anything else, go home." She had reached a stage in her cancer again where she was feeling desperately hot. Nobody, not even me, thought of giving her a fan. What they did is they opened the windows. And I went to see her one day, winter day, and it was cold. And I sat by her bedside, and I really had to turn up my collar because of the draft that was whipping through that house. Terrible conditions. Making it even worse, her poor husband had a gammy leg. And with a gammy leg, he had to try and carry everything up and downstairs for her, because she was completely bedridden. It was an awful situation. Surely something could be done better for people like this. And then the third situation that came at almost the same time was a three-generation family, grandma living with her daughter and son-in-law and their late teenage son. And grandma had never had a day's illness in her life, but she went to the consultant and they said, "Sorry, you've got a cancer, we can't do anything for you, go home." And they may not have put it in quite as baldly as that, but that's how it came over to her. And you know, the hospitals, I'm afraid, sometimes still say things in a way people hear it in a way that is not very helpful for them, you know, very hurtful in fact. And she came home, and three-generation family, the daughter said, "I'm not a nurse, I can't cope with this," and the son said, "I want to have my records on as loud as usual," and he actually still plays in a folk rock band himself, so he's still a good friend. But it wasn't a suitable sort of situation. And I remember we spent a lot of time with the family trying to support them as we found a nursing home place for grandma. It was a nursing home which today is very good, but in those days was far from satisfactory. And fortunately, I say fortunately, she died about a week after going into it. So, but it was a sad situation. Something ought to be done that was better, I kept thinking. And then, all of a sudden, the old rectory at Hingham came on the market. And I knew nothing about hospices, but I thought that would make a hospice. Care for people like these ones I've just been telling you about. And I didn't do anything. I'm a bit like Jonah in the Old Testament, you know. God had a job for him, and Jonah said, no way, God, I'm not going to do that. And he tried to run away. He got on a ship to go the opposite direction, in fact, to the place God wanted him to go to. And you know the story. And it is a story, but it's a story with a very real meaning, you know. I didn't actually physically run away, but I just said, no, I'm not. I just ignored it. And we heard that the old rectory had been sold. And I have honestly never in my life felt so guilty. God was kicking me round the room, saying, you stupid boy, Richard. I give you opportunities to do things. I ask you to do something. What do? You do nothing. Then God is so merciful. And a fortnight later, we discovered the sale had fallen through. So I said, rather through gritted teeth, you know, right, Lord, I'll try and do something, see what we can do. So I started talking to other people. And I was at that time rural dean, and I was also chairman of Churches Together. So it was people in the churches of all denominations that I talked to. And many of them, especially people in the deanery, said, well, you ought to go and talk to the bishop about this, Richard. And our bishop at that time was a lovely man called John Wayne, who still lives in Suffolk, and he's still around, still a great friend. Not the cowboy, but the same name. I rang him up and said, can I come and see you, and arranged a date. And I mean, I didn't tell him why. It was not unusual, obviously, it's rural dean for me to go and talk to the bishop, you know. So I drove across to Ipswich to see him, thinking he'll say, don't be silly, Richard, you can't think you're going to raise £500,000 to do a thing like this. How naive, £500,000, but still, that was the sort of thinking. And I told him the story, including the guilt bit, and he at once said, and I always get emotional at this point because it is so moving to me that it happens like this. He said to me, he said, I know just the place for you to go and look at. And before he'd become our bishop, which he'd only been for about a year, he'd been Bishop of Stafford. And in that area, they were turning an old rectory into a hospice. It became St Giles Hospice. I think it has modern buildings since then, but they were using an old rectory at that point. And so Joyce, my wife, and I went up to Whittingham, where it is, near Lichfield, and saw it, met the clergyman, got taken around, saw it. Absolute confirmation that this is the right thing to do. And we came back so confirmed in it that we were going to do it. And so we started collecting other people around us. We talked to the health authority. We talked to all sorts of people. We got a little steering group going, and we never bought in a rectory, because that one fell through on us as well. I'd actually got the MP, who was Elder Griffiths in those days, coming to look at it and to hear all about what we were doing, you see. And we took him across to the rectory, to the old rectory, and the people said, well, sorry, Richard, we're taking it off the market, because we're doing a family swap. And there was a GP in the town who needed to find accommodation for his mother and her companion, his elderly widowed mother and her companion, so needed a bigger house than he'd got, you see. And they were related to the people who were in the old rectory, So they were doing a swap, house swap. Actually, we always used the old rectory for our first meetings because Edward Barrington Ward, who was the GP, became our first honorary medical advisor and got involved with the hospice, and finally left Bury to go and work full-time in hospice work in the Highland Hospice in Scotland. So that was how we didn't using a rectory. We then had to look for somewhere else. And we found a house in Bury called Turret Close. It's that one there on here. It's in Westgate Street, very near the Roman Catholic Church, if you know that bit of Bury. It had been used by the American services during the war, and after the war, partly to help meet the housing crisis, they had converted it very badly, very hastily, into about 8 flats. And 7 of those were empty by this time, and in bad condition, really. And the lady who owned it was, again, very supportive and very helpful, and let us have it at a very reasonable price. And we got grants to do it up. We managed to rehouse the one remaining tenant and all that sort of thing and get it going. And so Turret Close became our first base. But our plan always was to start with nurses in the community, then a day hospice facility, and then beds. Because we thought if we start with a nurse in the community, we get care going quickly, you know, rather than having to wait for beds to be established. And our very first nurse started on the 1st of May 1984. So that is, I always consider, is the birthday of the hospice. And it's an important day to us, you know, that was when our very first one nurse started. She very quickly became 3. She's now become something like 170 employees at the hospice, plus 830 volunteers. So nearly 1,000 people working here as part of this. That's the wonderful growth that's happened since 1984. So that was really how we got going. And as you can tell from that, I've been involved since way before it began. People often say, you're the founder of the hospice. I always deny it and say, no, I'm not. God is. And as you can tell from the story, I was very reluctant in one sense. But it's been a wonderful privilege to be involved. It's been a great thrill to be involved. And I've never regretted a moment of it. I'm so delighted, so humbled at the way the whole community has taken the hospice to its heart and built on what was given at that point, you know. It's wonderful. And since then, we used Turret Close for about 10 years. We had, then the health authority offered us a bit of land, and we were wondering how we were going to build. We had a day hospice meeting in Turret Close, which was very nice and very domestic. We were desperately concerned about how we could possibly build onto it to make the bedded unit. We did actually, going through some old papers a few days ago, come across the plans that were drawn up for as a possible approach to getting beds into Turret Close or into Turret Close Garden. But it wasn't going to be easy, and things had changed a lot since we'd started. People were used to going out of town for shopping. There were buses running out of town as well, which there weren't in 1984, you know. And yet there was much more traffic, and so the area around Turret Close and that dreadful roundabout that they're playing with at this very moment, you know, it was creating a lot more traffic and activity around there. And so when the health authority said, would you like a bit of land, I suspect that the government had told them they'd got to use all their estates, you know. We said yes. And so we came up to this site, which was totally wooded when we came. We came in to cut the first turf, and I don't know quite, we don't quite know where we cut it. We think it's somewhere under the vestibule as you can come in the hospice, or just outside the doors probably. Anyway, and they cleared a bit of woodland and built this place. We came into here, we took it over at the end of 1992, and our first patients came into the beds in March 1993. In our original plan, we'd said we'd like to have beds by 1990, so we failed by 3 years, but not too bad, I don't think, really, when you're starting something like that. Since we've been in here, we've had 2 major revamps to update the buildings, to increase capacity, to make it easier to work in and keep up to date with health and safety regulations and all that sort of thing, you know. I think in a way it's become a little less domestic than it was originally, but that's not our doings, that's because of the rules and regulations we have to obey. We make it as domestic and as homely as it possibly can be, because people are family when they come here. I often talk about the hospice family. I mean by that those who work here, those who are patients here, and their families and all our supporters out in the community are all part of the hospice family. And it's a wonderful big family. We changed the name, 8 years ago? Something like that, to add the word care, hospice care, to show that we're not just a building, but we're a community. And we're involved with the community, out there where people are. That's how we started, and that's how we're working now. More and more, though, and in a much more complete and fuller way than we were able to do when we just had the one nurse who was going out. But that's the joy of it, that we're part of the wider community. The wider community, as I've said before, took the hospice to its heart, and the support and wonderful things, wonderful fundraising things like Girls' Night Out, which is quite beyond description, really. It's an incredible event. Are so much part of the life of West Suffolk and Thetford area now.